Good morning to everyone. I would like to welcome all the audience who joined to this webinar of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade under the title of Impacts of the War in Ukraine on the Western Balkans. So no surprise, as the war in Ukraine broke out only 2 weeks ago, this immediately rose important questions about the Western Balkans as well, as Russia being a dominant player in the region, of course, who wants to preserve its influence, but the question remains by what means. So accordingly to that, we invited panelists from both inside and outside the region. In case from outside of the region, that means the European Union, to see how they view the concerns about the Russian aggression in the Western Balkans as well. So I would like to introduce who is here with us today. Firstly, Adnan Ćerimagić, Senior Analyst of the European Stability Initiative in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Secondly, Luka Šterić, researcher of the Belgrade Center for Security Policy. And Bogdan Zawadewicz, Research Fellow of the Center for Eastern Studies in Poland. And Bogdan will be here with us with a video as well, but unfortunately he was just stuck in the traffic, so that's why he's a bit late, but no worries about that. I'm Julianna Ármás, Research Fellow of the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade, and I will be the moderator of this online event today. But before starting the discussion, I would like to just underline that the event is part of the Western Balkans Exploring Trajectories for the Region project, which was financially supported by the International Visegrad Fund. In the framework of the mentioned project, the Western Balkans scenarios report was published, and this will be shared on our Facebook page. So everyone who's interested in, please have a look at it. And just one technical information before starting actually the discussion. I would like to draw the audience attention to the fact that we welcome your questions, and you can ask them even now or during the discussion. And for that, please use the Q&A box available from the bottom of the toolbar on Zoom. So please use that. If you just don't find this Q&A box, you can write it in the chat box as well. So that would have been my last technical information. And now we are finally starting the discussion because at this point I believe that the audience is actually here. So firstly, I will ask the panelists to share their introductory thoughts and their opening remarks. And firstly, I would ask Adi to share your introductory thoughts about the impact of the war in Ukraine on the security architecture of the Western Balkans region, and of course on Bosnia and Herzegovina. And if you please elaborate on what is the significance of the EU4 personnel increase, that would be really nice. So Adi, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks everyone who's attending and watching us via Facebook. I think it's important to start with a bit of a bigger picture, what's at stake at the moment. And when we look at the developments in Ukraine and around the Ukraine, we can see that a nuclear power, Russian Federation, has and its president have decided to use tanks and weapons to invade a neighboring and a sovereign and independent country with an aim, initial aim to overthrow the government that was democratically elected. As a response, this democratically elected government has received support from the EU and the NATO members, but also from many other democratic states around the world. And we know that both Moscow and the President Putin have been talking about not just the Ukraine, but an attempt or intention to renegotiate or redefine the entire European security architecture. And in that sense, not just the analysts and the people observing the situation, but also High Representative of the EU, Borrell and the General Secretary of the NATO, Stoltenberg, have said that the Western Balkans, and in particular Bosnia and Herzegovina, could be part or could be one of the fields where Russia and the Moscow might try to steer problems and try to divert resources of the EU and the NATO and try to de facto, I would say, make EU, NATO, West discuss the new European security architecture or whatever the idea behind it is. And there is a bit of a, at the moment, I would say, especially in the media in the Western Balkans, there's a bit of a debate which is more abstract, like what could, how could Russia do it, you know? And here for me, the bigger question or the bigger picture is, what are the weaknesses of the Western Balkans that Russia or Moscow could use to do what High Representative Borrell, but also Secretary General of NATO have been saying? And there I see a lot of leftovers of the work from the EU that can be exploited. I mean, you have a group of 3 countries, North Macedonia, Albania, and Kosovo, that have been for years frustrated by neglect and disappointment from the EU because the EU was unable with these 3 countries to respond to positive developments in these countries. There, I think about the visa liberalization for Kosovo, but also about opening of accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia. If you think about Serbia, for years now, Serbia is not moving anywhere. It doesn't have a goal of EU membership at its disposal. And because of that, I would say we have seen a full reversal of many positive developments that we have seen in Serbia in the past two decades. We see, you know, I will start as a Bosnian, from a Bosnian perspective. We see media close to government, but also ministers talking about the Serbian world, talking about the injustice of the current borders, talking about, you know, a potential wars. Media in Serbia have been since 2017, 18, you know, on a weekly basis, there's another invasion, another war. They have been antagonizing neighbors, Bosniaks, Albanians for years now. But also there is democratic deficit, there are security issues inside the Serbia as well. And when we talk about Bosnia and Herzegovina in the past 8 months, we have in Banja Luka with the ruling coalition in Republika Srpska a plan to de facto collapse institutional and constitutional architecture of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Dayton Peace Agreement. So across the board, across the region, you see, and I mean, in Montenegro, there is in between the governments, there's a fragile government. So you see a lot of potential weaknesses of the Western Balkans that can be exploited by Russia or anyone else, but at this moment it's Russia that potentially can do it. So the question for the EU is, can it now quickly in next days or next couple of weeks send a clear message to the Western Balkans de facto to try to convince some of the individuals that are in between, like many say President Vučić is for some reason in between the West and Russia, etc., and to try to convince democratic majorities in the countries of the Western Balkans that any attempts to use violence, any attempts to steer some kind of problems to improve some of the perceived injustices will not work, and that there is a path for the Western Balkan countries to move forward and to move towards the EU. And at this moment, I would say, and the EU for mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina have been used as a deterrence. In a sense, EU has sent a message to Bosnia and Herzegovina, to the leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We are watching, we are sending extra EU for forces. We will react in case that, I don't know, Dodik or any other politician, it can be also, you know, a group of extreme individuals in Visegrad or in somewhere else in Bosnia and Herzegovina that want to create interethnic violence, that want to create, you know, some kind of incidents that then can lead to, you know, to a chain of events. And I think in that sense, it's a good message. It's a good message what we hear also from the EU saying that, you know, the visit from the German foreign minister, where she's talking about, you know, you can't change the borders, but what I'm missing is a much clearer message from the EU to say, you know, if you try to work with Russia, or if you try to, use the vacuum to change the borders, to collapse Bosnia and Herzegovina, to do whatever, to use violence, you will be met with the same sanctions, with same reactions as the Russian Federation has. Furthermore, if there is a violence, you will be, held accountable in a way that the political leaders were held accountable in the 1990s. But at the same time, I think it's more important to capture the democratic majority in the countries of the Western Balkans. It is important to send a message that there is an EU perspective for the Western Balkans, but the one that is achievable in 5 to 7 years. And there, I have to say also last night's debate on Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, but also the statements by the foreign minister of Germany in Bosnia and Herzegovina do not give me much hope that there is a understanding of that in the EU. We still hear empty phrases of you belong to the EU perspective is there, you can achieve it if you work on the reforms, but all of that, majority of people are aware that that's not true. It's not just about the Western Balkan state. It is also about the EU not being ready to enlarge to the Western Balkans. So I think in that sense, we see with the EU and some other messages, hopeful signals from the EU, but much more is still missing.
Thank you, Adi, for this really complex opening statement. Now I'm turning to Luka, who is from Serbia. So my question and my suggestion was about Serbia and the Serbian stance on this whole Ukrainian aggression. So it seems now that Serbia is falling between two stools from following the events of the past 2 weeks, Luka, and I would ask you to just elaborate on that. What role do the good Serbian and Russian relations and as the April elections play in the rejection of the sanctions of the European Union towards Russia? So please, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. Yes, I'm very much. I can follow with what Adnan said. Much of what he said resonates a lot with what I can say. But let me focus first on Serbia, as you said. So let me start by explaining the official position of Serbia, which is maybe complex and hard to understand for some people outside of the country. So the official position is that Serbia supports the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and it voted for the UN declaration that was condemning the aggression of Russia on the Ukraine, but will not and did not join sanctions against Moscow, which have been EU-led. And to understand this very specific position of Serbia, we need to understand the Serbian foreign policy doctrine, which has been active for the last 15 years or so. And this is the so-called four pillars doctrine, four pillars being the EU and the US on the west, and then Russia and China on the east. And there are several objective reasons for this complex balancing act, such as somewhat conflicting national interests when it comes to the EU integration, and then the preservation of Kosovo's sovereignty over Kosovo, which is the official stance of Serbia. But also, of course, there are some political calculations there, and sometimes Serbia is profiting for this kind of balancing act, but especially in such difficult situations and crisis situations such as this one, it is very difficult to maintain this position. So maybe let's start with the Ukraine question per se, and actually explain this kind of balancing act in this regard on the Ukrainian war question. So there are three main reasons why Serbia has decided to have this kind of position and not introduce sanctions to Moscow. First is Serbia is, like pretty much everybody else in Europe, heavily dependent on energy supplies from Russia. So this is, of course, the economic interest, especially when it comes to the gas supplies. So as I said, this is nothing different than any other country in Europe, but for Serbia, I think it's specifically vulnerable question. And the second one is more political and actually geostrategical, and it comes to this Kosovo issue as a as a focus of Serbian policy for last decades, of course. And this is the question of Russian support for Serbia in the UN Security Council, which is, I would say, Serbian wild card when it comes to this issue, and irreplaceable support for Serbia. And this is why Serbia cannot maybe gamble with losing this kind of support from Moscow. And the third thing, and maybe the most important in this moment, are the upcoming elections. As Hungary, we are having elections in the first weekend of April. So, of course, the Serbian government is very well aware how a tougher stance on Moscow would resonate in the predominantly pro-Russian public in Serbia. We are doing public polling every year, and every year constantly Russia is the most popular foreign actor in Serbia. And there are some historical and political reasons, such as this support over Kosovo issue. But of course, there's also a heavy pro-Russian propaganda by the pro-government media in Serbia. And this is the reason why the public opinion on this is somewhat different than the rest of Europe, I would say. On the other hand, of course, official Belgrade has to support the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So it would not negate its own position when it comes to the territorial integrity of Serbia over Kosovo. And we saw the same thing in Crimea situation, when Serbia stated that it supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine and but will not impose sanctions to Russia. But also openly opposing the EU position on Russia would completely isolate Serbia in the international arena, severely harm its economic circumstances, of course, but also basically suspend its EU integration process for years to come. And this is also one of the, or actually nominally at least, a main foreign goal of Serbia, even with this government. As we saw, when it comes to your second question about the EU perspective for Serbia is still active. I would say that this decision of government in Belgrade is already having some kind of negative impact, of course, on this path. We saw in the European Parliament resolution, which was condemning Russian aggression on Ukraine. They said that they strongly regret Serbia's position and said that it damages the EU accession process, of course. And I would say that the longer the Russian offensive in Ukraine lasts, the more urgent the pressures will become for Serbia to join, to harmonize with the EU position on Ukraine. But I would say that it's very much unlikely that Serbian position will change, especially before the elections in April. I think the EU and Brussels know that as well. They're very well aware of this position. And I would say that West is facing the dilemma here. Will it pressure Vučić and the regime in Serbia maybe too hard and risk the shift further towards the east and Russia, but not only Russia, and China is, the stronger, very much getting strong. The presence of China is very much getting stronger throughout the years. So this is also Beijing maybe can, use this kind of a shift towards the east. Or the other position of EU would be to show stronger commitment and to speed up the integration process and secure a firm ally in this kind of autocratic regime in Serbia, which was kind of like the stabilocracy support which we have seen from EU in years that have passed, especially from Angela Merkel, etc. And I would say that even in this kind of, let's call it the best case scenario of a positive approach of the EU, I'm still very much doubtful how much this position would benefit the country itself, if it would actually solidify this kind of autocracy in Serbia in favor of, instead of pushing for reforms, which was the original plan of the EU integration. And also, is Europe ready to accept another Orban-esque regime in Europe? So these are the questions to be answered later on, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Luka, for this, once again, a little, very informative opening statement. And now I'm turning to Bogdan. Welcome among us. And we are really happy that you arrived. So for you, just after these two opening statements on Bosnia and Serbia and the Russian influence and their stances on the war, I would say take a step back and analyze Russia's role in the rising tensions in the region. And you mentioned that maybe just a little bit about Bosnia and the Croatian involvement in Bosnia, because as we heard, the situation in Bosnia is also unstable and the state itself. So yes, just now we are taking a step back, and please a bit about Russia's role over the region. So Bogdan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I just have to make sure that everyone can hear me. Yeah, great. Thank you. So thanks for having me today. I'm happy to be a panelist in this discussion. So just to clarify, I will maybe start first with a brief analysis of the shift that occurred in the Croatian foreign policy. I think it's very crucial to to better comprehend the dynamics in the Balkan region. With the regard of Russia and the ongoing conflict and war in Ukraine. And then I will briefly also analyze the, actually that might be interesting, the announcement that was released by the Russian embassy in Sarajevo 12 days ago. I guess this announcement reflects the Russia's position on the region very well. Right, so when it comes to Croatia, what we could observe in last 2 months, there was certain dynamics. So, well, according to the constitution, the Croatia's foreign policy is supposed to be coordinated by the president of the country and the prime minister. That is the government. Since the government and the prime minister and the ruling coalition and the president are from two different opposed parties, there's a certain domestic or local political conflict that, especially in the weeks that preceded Russia's invasion on Ukraine, caused or influenced the sort of division in Croatia's foreign policy. So we had, especially in January, first weeks of January, we had a couple of statements or views expressed by the Croatian president Zoran Milanović. In his statements, he suggested that certain Russia's interest when it comes to Ukraine and to the region of Eastern Europe should be taken into consideration by the NATO and the EU. He was also kind of criticizing the NATO and the EU for the lack of understanding of those Russia's interests. He somehow distanced himself from Ukraine and the Ukrainian arguments on the situation, especially with regard to the separatist republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. So one could get an impression that Milanović was trying somehow balance between the two blocks, that is the Russia and the West. And his views were heavily criticized by the members of the Croatian government, mostly by the Croatian Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister. They were even accusing him, or using this sort of language, accusing him of being a Russian agent, right? Which is, quite a heavy accusation. So they were showing why Milanović was kind of, as I said, trying to balance between Russia and the West, criticizing mostly the Western structures. The government was showing the full loyalty and commitment to the Western structure, that is NATO and the EU. So this all changed when the war started, when the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine started. What we could observe then was the consolidation or unification of the Croatian foreign policy towards Ukraine and Russia. So Milanović switched to the government's position and of course supported. So they basically built up the common approach, the common stance on the conflict, showed full support for the Ukrainian territorial integrity. They condemned Russia's aggression on Ukraine, and as I said, they showed full commitment to their Western allies, which is important. For instance, also from Polish perspective, before the war, we were, when our government, along with the partners from NATO, we were strengthening or reinforcing the so-called eastern flank, right? So basically, we had the system of bringing the armed forces from the NATO member states to our territory. There was the rotation system, and Croatia was very much involved in this process. However, as I said before the war started, Milošević had made a statement on the engagement or involvement of Croatian troops in the eastern flank. So the troops were, their mandate, the first group, not the first, but the last group, returned to Croatia and was supposed to be replaced by another group of Croatian army soldiers, but this didn't happen. And that was kind of controversial in this regard. What happened just yesterday was that Croatian parliament voted or supported the decision on sending 70 Croatian soldiers to Hungary. And basically this also kind of was probably required by the president, Milanovic. A few days ago, he said that that would be the only possible place where the Croatian soldiers could be sent within the NATO structures. So these are so this shift in Croatia's foreign policy could be interesting, but also I think there's another aspect that probably we can discuss more in detail afterwards. That along with this along with the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, one of the key elements or the key efforts that were made by the Croatian government in the last couple of months concerned the issue of electoral reform in Bosnia. And this, of course, also somehow engaged Russia, since Russia plays an important role especially in Bosnia. Bosnia is, in general, I would say, the most vulnerable country, also because of the guarantees that were made by the external powers, including Russia, and their real kind of political and legal leverage they have through the Security Council of the United Nations, for forces, and so on. So that was the shift in Croatia's foreign policy. And the second topic that I would like to briefly just discuss is the statement of the Russian embassies from Sarajevo. This is interesting, but I said it perfectly reflects the Russia's attitude towards the region. So apart from criticizing in this statement, they criticize of course, the Western involvement in Ukraine, accusing the West for lying, for not kind of being supportive with regard to the violation of human rights by Ukraine in the eastern regions of the country. But there's in the second part of the statement, the Russian embassy refers solely to the Balkan region, to Bosnia and Herzegovina. So basically, they say that Bosnia is a sort of sponsorship country or protectorate country, where the US intentionally keeps this dysfunctional system running. So it's basically made on purpose, and the purpose is to bring such a dysfunctional country together with Kosovo to the EU structures in order to somehow make the whole European Union a bit more dysfunctional. So the Russians' argument is that there's a sort of geopolitical competition between the East within the Western structures, between the US and the EU. And I think this is, as I said, this reflects their perception of the region, and in a more broad sense, the perception of the West. So I will probably stop. I will end in this. I will end now, and we can, I guess, continue our discussion later. So thank you.
Thank you, Bogdan, for your opening statement. And yes, you raised many follow-up questions. Firstly, but essentially the most pressing one, I would say, and I will ask that, and just feel free to decide which one of you would like to answer that, or all of you. That is it feasible that the Western Balkans will become a battleground? Actually, So after the war in Ukraine, and the question also refers to on what level. So because there are other levels than military battlegrounds. So I think maybe that's the most pressing question. So also again, I'm turning to all of you.
Well, maybe I can jump in, or
Sorry.
Luka.
Yeah, I was just supposed. No, sorry. Please go ahead.
Please do. No, I just wanted to maybe shortly rephrase my introductory remark, and that is, for me, the question is: are there weaknesses in the Western Balkans that Russia can exploit, that can then steer the things in the direction that would destabilize any of the countries or the entire region? And I can say yes, there are. You know, we have since 2016 a decrease in EU engagement, or the power of EU in the region. There's a lot of disappointment. There's a lot of frustration. You have, I mean, Luka, you can explain better than me, but in Serbia, for example, you have a disappointment with the EU from pro-EU forces who see EU as working with Vučić, with authoritarian, looking through his fingers when it comes to authoritarian tendencies, etc. And then you have a criticism from anti-EU because with the usual arguments against the EU. So the level of frustration and the level of disappointment with the EU is enormous. And on top of that, in the past couple of years, we see a growing, growing tendencies, as I explained, in Serbia, from return to 1980s rhetoric to, talks about the neighbors. You have in Bosnia and Herzegovina what Banja Luka is doing, the question of electoral law. Obviously, after 13 years of trying to reform the electoral law, has, reached its peak in the way how I would say both sides in the federation are seeing the issue and are seeing the other in this issue. If you've observed, for example, how Croat media in Bosnia and Herzegovina are and analysts and academics are talking about the election law, you would imagine that there is a apartheid style of discrimination towards the Croats, that someone is using violence against the Croats. The level of emotion and emotionalization of this topic is so high that Russians obviously saw a chance in that. So you had Lavrov visiting Zagreb just 4 or 5 months ago, or a bit longer, but he was there sending a clear message: we stand with Croats when it comes to the electoral law. So they are using all the weaknesses throughout the region. And what Bogdan said about this argument from Russian embassy that the US is pushing Bosnia and other Western Balkans into the EU to weaken the EU. I mean, it's if you go back to Sputnik and the narrative that was spread throughout the years in Sputnik, that's exact. They are just tapping into something that already exists, and they try to create divisions and steer further instability. So if you're asking, are there circumstances, are there weaknesses? Yes, they are. Whether it could be a false flag incident, whether it can be a true local interethnic or interethnic incident that then can become much wider, and that can then just ride on all these weaknesses. Probably it could, but really I don't have any intelligence data that I guess NATO Secretary General or the High Representative Borrell have for me to share with you here. So that would be kind of my assessment. Sorry for taking it maybe too long.
Thank you. So Luka, if you would like to add something, sure. Just please.
Thank you. Yes, I can completely once again echo what Adnan said pretty much. I really hope that we will not have a conflict on military level, and I think at this moment is not realistic really to talk about, but we have to be really worried about the trends that we have seen. I mean, the Western Balkans is already a political battleground for the last decade, I would say, or so. And I would assess that it hasn't been this unstable since the 1990s, to be honest. And much of this blame is on the West because it left what I call the vacuum of visions for the future. At one moment, it seemed as if the integration is a natural process that's going to happen. We all had a very clear perspective ahead of us. But this process, this seemingly never-ending process of integration, and pretty much, we see some even reversible trends in that regard, have left the field for both all the new players in the region to emerge. We see, of course, Russia, and we speak about Russia today the most, but also China, Turkey, Gulf states as well. And I think we see the crisis which was unimaginable just a decade ago in this region. As Adnan said, we have open fears of the new war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We hear this radical narrative by the government in Belgrade concerning the Serbian world and the maybe renegotiation of the borders, etc. Also from Zagreb, as Bogdan said, regarding the Bosnian Croats issue, some very inflammatory speech as well. We see a complete stalemate in Kosovo dialogue and crisis sparkling every few months. There as well, we see the instability in Montenegro, which was also, without precedent over the last 2 or 3 years. And we heard the open talks about, redrawing borders in the Balkans. All of this was unimaginable just a decade ago. So we have seen the reversible trends, I would say. And I think Ukrainian war has shaken this already unstable region to the core. As we saw on the first day of war, we had additional EUFOR troops being deployed in the Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we have seen somewhat, I would say, frightening and maybe not too diplomatic speech from the former High Representative of Bosnia, Valentin Incko, when he called for NATO to ensure the safety of Bosnia and Herzegovina and even deployed, the troops on the borders with Serbia. We heard conflicting voices coming from the highest political positions in Croatia about whether or not the armed forces are being put on the high alert, and Prime Minister Plenković also stating that the government is cautiously observing what's happening in the region. And we also heard the Speaker of the Serbian Parliament, Ivica Dačić, claiming that any attack on Republika Srpska would be considered as an attack on Serbia. So all of this shows that we need a completely different approach from the West, really, and a radical shift in the new strategy, which would give a credible perspective for the whole region and in the near future, not only onwards, because otherwise I think we have seen in Balkans before it can spiral without the control very easily. So let us hope that this will not happen.
Okay. So.
Yes.
Yes.
Bogdan, please.
Yeah, there are many interesting topics, but I would like to focus on the Russia's activities in the region. I would say that they have a twofold character. So on one hand, they try to use their formal leverage that is given to them, especially in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and to some extent to Kosovo, since Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council. They do have such leverage, and what is interesting in Republika Srpska, especially, that the elites from Banja Luka, they almost entirely somehow identify their national vital interest with the policy or the position of Russia within the international system. So they believe that Russia could be the only defender of their or representative of their interests on a global level, and that's why I usually argue that Russia or Serbs from Republika Srpska are much more dependent on Russia than, let's say, Serbs from Serbia. So this is the formal leverage that Russia has, but the country tries to take advantage of the, I would say, local reality, that is the very high level of informality. What I also learned from my research in the region is that Russia's institutions, individuals, NGOs, and all other kind of less formalized institutionalized groups tend to operate in a rather informal manner, meaning they try to, they're probably also, they're present in the region through all those institutions, also including the Orthodox Church. And I think that this should be also taken into account by the Western actors, while kind of defining or identifying Russia's influence in the region. This is also kind of visible in Serbia, when you, I'm not sure if Luka mentioned these protests from last weekend, from Friday actually, on the Belgrade streets, and there's gonna be a new protest that is scheduled for Sunday, if I'm not wrong. You know, but if you look at these groups, these far right organizations, all those associations, NGOs that stand behind this, you know, pro-Russian activities, you see that they are somehow connected to on this or the other way, to their Russian patrons, right? Also, if you look at the media landscape, this is also kind of, especially in Serbia and Republika Srpska, I think in Republika Srpska the situation is even worse. You have basically every day you have the reports from the Lugansk and Donetsk republics. They have their journalists there that twice a day, you know, there's a live report from the battlefield, and they present only the narrative that sticks to the Russia's interest, of course. And this probably has a significant impact on the society. In Serbia, again, you have, if you look at the tabloids and the front pages, you know, basically you can learn that it is Ukraine that invaded Russia. You know, I think this is also the consequence of the years of the Alexander Vučić policy of tolerance towards all those kind of pro-Russian organizations, pro-Russian actors. And probably that would be my question to Luka. How do you perceive the Vučić position? Would you agree that he may actually join the sanctions after the elections? Because I understand that he did not want to follow the sanctions due to the electoral campaign. But would you agree that this may change after the elections? Yeah. So thanks.
Luka, please just.
Sure, I can answer. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Bogdan, for this question. As I said, I think it's very unlikely that this will change before the elections. After the elections, it might change, and we have already seen some kind of a shifts in these pro-regime narratives in the pro-regime media in Serbia, which has already kind of you know, softened this position on Ukraine being the one attacking Russia, and not the other way around. So we've seen some shifts in the narrative, and I think, you know, being so strongly in control of the narrative in the country, Vučić can gradually shift the perception of the public opinion as well in this case. And I think, you know, the more he's pressured by the West, probably he will, you know, shift more and more in this regard. It also, I mean, I think it is also, he's leaving this position in case of, you know, depending on how the Russian invasion will continue. I mean, in the sense of what will be the Russian position going forward. We have seen Russia being pretty weakened in the international arena nowadays, and I think Vučić sees this, and, you know, shifting he's shifting more towards the West now. But in case, you know, the cards are, you know, reshifted again, and we see another, you know, progress of Russia or something like that, and maybe, you know, Russia returning in the Western Balkans, he might shift the other way as well. He's really unpredictable, and I think the only real incentive he has is, you know, holding on to the power. So whatever keeps him in the power is the one where he will go. At this moment, I think it's more realistic that he will shift more towards the West in these circumstances, because the pressure from the West will become much stronger. But it is really unpredictable, and let's see what what the next few months will bring in Ukraine. Start with this. Thank you.
Thanks for the answers to all of you. And my next question would be regarding this whole EU integration. You mentioned many times that now it is the moment for the European Union to deliver something that the European Union, but says that the European Union is still interested in the Western Balkans. What do you understand under this? What steps are expected from the European Union from the side of the Western Balkans? How can you just describe those steps that should be taken? And my question is about really the time frame as well. What's the deadline, or the near future, or well, not a really near future? When can be those breaks to be expected under, for example, this French presidency? For example, many times President Macron mentioned that yes, it is a priority of the Western Balkans for the European Union's enlargement policy. But how do you see this? That would be the question regarding those steps expected from the.
Okay, I'll jump in. How do I say this? If you look at Bosnia and Herzegovina and the dynamic inside the politicians, you will see that in the past, I would say, too many years, the way to change, I mean, Bosnia and Herzegovina in the past 10 years hasn't seen any serious reform of almost anything except some economic reforms that we've seen in 2016 and 2017. There was no dramatic change in institutional architecture. There was no dramatic change inside different entities or cantons when it comes to public policies or the institutions. And the reason for that, people usually think that reforms that have happened because of the Office of the High Representative and the international role. But that's simply not true, or it's not the full picture. For the full picture, yes, OHR had a position, but the EU was fundamental. If we talk about the SAA, Stabilization and Association Agreement, if we talk about the visa-free travel and reforms that were necessary in relation to that, you see that a lot of institutions that are today under attack by Dodik and the ruling coalition Republika Srpska were actually established and then got their own life because of the EU accession process. So I think that at this moment, political elites in Bosnia and Herzegovina left without any EU process, left without any framework that is there. We have this completely self-destructive agenda. On one hand, you have in Republika Srpska Milorad Dodik trying to destroy the state-level institutions. In the federation, you have, in particular, the Croat side, which has emotionalized to such extent the presidency seat that it has, blocked the election of the new government. It's blocking any substantial laws or changes in the federation. It is blocking the election of some of the key judiciary institutions in the federation. So I started this to say, I think that both Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also the region, need the EU accession process, need some kind of a process in order to reverse the trajectory on which they are. And I don't want to meddle too much in Serbia, but I also think that the reason why we have Vučić semi-constructive during this crisis has nothing to do with the EU accession process, because he himself doesn't believe in it. It has to do with the economic investments that Germany and some other countries have invested in Serbia. And I think if we want to talk about the rule of law and democracy in Serbia, without the EU accession process, we will not be able to work with it. If you look at the statements issued by EU and the US in the past by US dominantly in the past couple of weeks on Serbia, you see, if the red line is you don't recognize the independence of Republika Srpska and you don't invade the North Kosovo, of course that you will have US officials saying that Serbia is on its EU path, that it's working tremendously well, etc. So sorry for this long introduction, but what I want to say is that if we want to change the trajectory in the region, we need some kind of EU accession process. But I also think that we need to be realistic. There are too many member states that do not want to see enlargement. They don't want to see more states sitting at the table. So I think we need an honest discussion inside the EU at the highest level, not the one like last night, which ended up with forwarding membership application from the 3 Eastern European countries. And then let's see, Nobody will judge this generation of politicians for forwarding the application because there was war, there was a pressure, we wanted to give a signal, and then let's have the next generation of politicians saying you can't open the accession talks because we're not ready to have more member states. So this honesty that has been ongoing for years with Western Balkans, I think it should be interrupted for the better of the region, for the better of Europe, and for the better of those three countries that have expressed their wish to change. So I think we need to be realistic in that sense. I don't think that EU can sit now and say we want to have all 6 by 2028. Among those 6 that do reforms, that change rule of law, that implement democratic standards, will be able to join in the next 5 to 7 years. I don't think we can get that kind of a consensus among the EU member states, among this generation of EU politicians. So I think we need an interim step that's on the path towards the EU membership, but that's so fundamental, so big, and so transformative that it actually creates the change in the trajectories in the region that I've said, but at the same time that 27 can agree on. At my think tank, we proposed the single market membership in a way that Sweden, Austria, Norway have joined in the past. And then as a second step, if there is a change inside the EU, if there are reforms in decision-making, etc., and if new members could join fully, that then as a second step, Western Balkans can say, we want now to join the EU, but we are not joining as, dysfunctional Bosnia, as semi-autocratic Serbia, but as the countries that went through 80% of adoption of acquis, fundamental changes of the rule of law, because you can't be a member of single market unless you have rule of law, and improvement in democratic standards, because if you want to join the single market and enjoy the benefits of being part of the most prosperous market in the world, then you also have to improve your democracies, if that's the condition coming from the EU. So I think in that sense, we would also have, as a countries, we would have a better chance to then also become full members of the EU. At the moment, I do not see any credible other way, but I also have to be honest, I also don't see seriously this kind of an interim step being discussed at the political level inside the EU, and that's what makes me scared at the moment.
Yes, Luka, yes, please just continue.
Yes, so I don't want to sound too optimistic because it's never smart to be optimistic about the situation in the Balkans, and I usually am not at all. But I just want to express maybe a glimpse of hope, because this kind of watershed moments really open up the possibility for dramatic shifts in the policy. And we have seen the stalemate for more than a decade, even 15 years now, when it comes to the EU process. But I think, as I said, the status quo is not an option anymore, even for the EU. And there are two potential strategies for the West in general, but especially for the EU. One is, the hard line against Russian players in the region, more specifically Dodik in Republika Srpska, to pressure him and maybe even to push towards some kind of a change in the state architecture of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and maybe withdrawal of the candidate status for Serbia, as we have heard maybe some voices, etc. Or there's a soft approach. I mean, these are the two juxtaposition opposites. Of course, there's a place in between, but the soft approach would mean maybe a new commitment to the forgotten European brothers in the Western Balkans, and a substantial push towards the membership of the whole region. I really believe that maybe this could radically speed up the integration process and maybe finally move us from this stalemate if the geopolitics becomes the primary concern. We have seen this in the past with Bulgaria and Romania. I'm not sure if this would be such a positive move for the region itself, as Adnan said, with maybe if this would mean disregarding the whole reform and the rule of law status in the region, etc. But this is a potential opportunity, also for the opportunity for the Western policymakers to make shifts in the public opinion in their countries regarding this topic. If you say we see the danger of the region shifting towards Russia, so maybe, or potential foreign actors imposing on the region, so maybe we can also pressure smaller states such as Bulgaria when it comes to North Macedonia, to give up on their demands and maybe make a push there. I'm not sure if I wouldn't be so optimistic to say that something will happen during the French presidency in that sense. President Macron was very firm on his stance before when it comes to the near integration in the near future, saying that it's not realistic. I think much will depend also on the new German government and will they bring a different approach from Merkel's support for the stabiliocracy in the region, and this is why this German Foreign Minister Baerbock visit to the region is so important, as we heard some messages yesterday in Bosnia. Today, let's see. I'm really eager to read what she will state in Belgrade because I think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of stance they will impose towards Vučić. But if I would have to guess, I think probably it would be something in between of this kind of hard line and soft line approach. Maybe pressure Dodik harder. I think this is what might happen, and make also some clear steps to ensure the region stays firmly within the sphere of influence of Europe. Maybe even offer membership for Montenegro, for example, in the years to come, as a clear symbolic message to the region. Montenegro being the smallest one and maybe the closest one to the Union, although of this instability at the moment. But I think, and maybe also, of course, candidate status for the others. We heard the messages from Bosnia yesterday about maybe if they could get the membership, the candidate status. We have the same thing in, of course, North Macedonia and Albania, which were already on the brink of this before. Visa liberalization for Kosovo. I think for Serbia, not much will change in the years to come. And but already this would be some kind of a substantial step forward. But I'm not sure if it's going to be enough. I think for Europe to really ensure stability in the region, we need the full integration in next 10 years. Let's say this would already be very optimistic, I think, from this side.
Yeah, but never be too afraid for being optimistic. So yes, sorry, Bogdan, just sorry for disturbing you. Please.
Yeah, yeah, sure, thanks. What actually is my main concern is that in case that this EU integration process does not accelerate, that does not speed up. I mean, I'm talking about the Balkan region. The region itself may become sort of gray zone, and because at some point this war in Ukraine will end, will be stopped, right? Will terminate, and a new international system will be created. And I'm afraid that someone would have to, the West would have to sit at the table with Russia and negotiate the new settlement, right? And if we let Russia to have this leverage, I mean, the Balkan region as an argument in negotiating the new settlement, this may actually come at the expense of the region's prosperity and the development. So my argument would be that the faster we move on with the integration in the Balkans, the better conditions we will have when making a new settlement with Russia, right? I mean, it's in the best interest of the region. So I think that Adnan's concept, or the idea of in setting up a sort of single market partnership with the EU is the absolutely right step. Because, for instance, yesterday we had the announcement from the EU delegation office in Sarajevo concerning the initiative of the Bosnia and Herzegovina institutions to aim at speeding up the integration process. Even Dodik at the meeting yesterday with the German Minister of Foreign Affairs was asking about the conditions which Bosnia has to fulfill in order to gain the candidacy status. But the announcement from the delegation, on one hand, the delegation supported the efforts of the Bosnian political elites. On the other, stick to the 14 key priorities from late in 2019 that concern the domestic reforms. So basically, the message is that as long as you do not make progress in those key priority areas, you won't be granted any candidacy status, right? So the process will not be accelerated. This actually, I'm not sure whether it's a right approach, but yeah. So But actually, I have also the question for Adnan concerning the situation in Bosnia. What's your opinion on the current dynamics in Republika Srpska and the relations? Because we could have noticed, we could notice in last couple of days, that the allies from Banja Luka were trying to somehow make the whole atmosphere a bit more relaxed. They were sending messages to the Serbian population, Serbian inhabitants of Bosnia, on the, like calming them down, saying that, the increase of the EUFOR troops is absolutely normal. There's no reason to be afraid of anything. Also, the head of the Republika Srpska Minister of Internal Affairs said there's absolutely no reason to be concerned about the security situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Dodik, as I said, now acts as a very moderate politician. So would you agree that it's rather it's made for tactical reasons, or this could be a result of their, they just got somehow afraid of the dynamics of the war in Ukraine, so they somehow took a more relaxed position because they stopped talking, or at least somehow do not talk about this that much anymore, about the relegation of the competences or powers from the central institutions to the entity. So would you agree that it's just made for tactical reasons, or this could be some sort of a radical shift or change, or genuine change in their position? Thank you.
Should I jump in, or?
Yes, definitely. Please.
I think that the politicians in Republika Srpska, in particular Dodik, but also members of his coalition, were surprised by how slowly Russia is advancing in the Ukraine. I think that they were expecting that it would be much quicker, and that the Ukrainian citizens will be more pro-Russian oriented. Because I think a lot of people were counting on what Sputnik and others have been saying, and that is that it's that the government position in Ukraine is just a Western puppet state propaganda, and that the citizens actually feel more pro-Russian than what's being presented in the Western media. And on the other hand, they were extremely shocked, I think all of us, with how united EU has reacted to what's happening in the Ukraine, together with the US. They were puzzled and shocked by what Germany has done and by what the new government has done. And I think, although it's not popular, but I think that the words by Commissioner Varhelyi from day before yesterday in the European Parliament have also stuck with some in Banja Luka, in the way how he changed his narrative, in how he has increased his narrative or extreme. So I think that is the reason why they are doing a tactical retreat, because they're not changing anything, they're not reversing anything that they have been adopting. They're not telling Foreign Minister Babok yesterday that they will be, giving up on the laws that have been adopted. They're not giving up on the plan that they have adopted. They're just making I would say, a tactical pause for now. And I think for that reason, it's important how EU reacts in next couple of weeks, and whether it, exploits this. Just one remark on also what you said previously, Bogdan. I think one mustn't never underestimate the actual power that Dodik has with his own party. Since 2006, in 2006, SNSD, Dodik's party, was the strongest. They had 41 out of 83 seats in the National Assembly of Republika Srpska. Since then, the number of votes and the number of seats has been decreasing, and the number of voters has been increasing. So people have been going out to vote in more numbers, but they've been voting for other than SNSD. So SNSD lost 13 seats in the parliament since 2006. Today they have 28 seats. So without the coalition partners, Dodik cannot implement anything. I saw a question from Ferenc in the chat, which is linked to that. I think people are too much focused on Dodik and what he does and what he doesn't do. I think the focus of the policy should also be on those that Dodik needs to implement anything that Putin or people in Kremlin tell him to do. And these are the people that do not have a flight to Moscow in case things go south. They don't have money necessarily on their accounts, people who are sitting in the National Assembly, people sitting in the government. So I think, Milorad Dodik is not Alexander Vučić, who through his party and 75% of seats in the National Assembly of Serbia has, captured almost completely the institutions in Serbia. Dodik needs his coalition partners to rule in the country. We've seen that during the health crisis. Almost 70% of institutions related to COVID were not under his direct influence of his party. It was of his coalition partner. So I think to cut things short, I think we need to focus also regarding to the question for Ferenc is not whether Dodik will do this, whether he will support. I think we need to also focus on the others that have. And one point, in the past couple of days, we also seen Dodik saying that Bosnia needs to vote against with Russia, basically, in the assembly of the UN. And that was twisted by the opposition in Republika Srpska as his attack on Vučić and on Serbia. And that's what he's afraid of, being presented in public in Republika Srpska as someone who's directly opposed to Vučić and in Serbia. And I think that's also part of his, I would say, retreat, or how you described it, of the calming down, because this instance where he was attacking the official institutions of Bosnia and Herzegovina that have, sided with the EU when it comes to the situation in the Ukraine, in a way also that Serbia did, being twisted as him also being against Serbia and Vučić is something that has created the fear. And then, because I talk too much, maybe EU4 and the mandate we can discuss later to answer Ferenc's question.
Well, thank you, Adi, but I just wanted to suggest that since you started to answer to Ferenc's questions about Dodik, maybe you could elaborate a bit on the EU4 question as well, which was just to tell the audience that do you think that EU4's mandate and possible Russian veto could come up in the fall as well regarding the extensions of the EU4 mandate? So how? Please just continue. It's a really pressing question, I think.
Maybe just also to add to the other part of the question, whether Dodik might get support from Russia for declaring the independence. I think we need to be prepared that he might get, with all the things that Putin has done, we need to be prepared for that option. I think in the attempt to prepare ourselves for that option, we need to work, and EU needs to work and needs to message itself not just towards Dodik, but also towards the people that he depends on to implement all these things. And that is, the price that will come with listening to those kind of messages. When it comes to the EU4 mission, so maybe for the public, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, EU has a military mission. That has to be, their mandate comes from the UN Security Council, and it needs to be renewed every November for another 12 months. It is under Chapter 7 of the UN, so it has the biggest possible mandate that the foreign forces can have in another given by the UN. And the question now is, because Russia has a veto, whether Russia can veto the prolongation now in November. I mean, it's difficult. We don't know what will happen until November. But I think what would be important as a message to Bosnia and also to Dodik and people like Dodik in Bosnia and Herzegovina would be that the EU and the US have an alternative for Russia vetoing the Security Council decision on the EU4 mission. There are other ways that there are legal explanations which say that some parts of the mission can stay also without the UN mandate. There's also a way in which Bosnian and Herzegovinian institutions can invite EU4 and NATO to stay. There are some legal explanations where it says that they already did through adoption of different laws and different signing of different agreements with the NATO. So I think all of that needs to be explored, needs to be seen, and needs to be then clearly communicated to actors in Bosnia and Herzegovina what will happen in the case of. I think it would also have a tremendous stabilization effect, and it would actually have it would actually show that the NATO and EU is serious about Bosnia and Herzegovina.
So can I briefly comment? Sorry, Adnan, thanks for your comment. I really appreciate it. However, I just have one remark. You referred to the opposition in Republika Srpska, but as far as I know, they also at the same time they stated that the only alleged institution in Bosnia to decide on the country's position with regard to the sanctions and other issues related to Ukraine is the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And they are well aware of the fact that if there's if the procedure goes as the constitution says via presidency, it will be blocked. So basically, more or less, we'll be in the same position where we are. I mean, I'm talking about Bosnia and Herzegovina, because officially Bosnia followed the sanctions, but the main problem is that the certain procedures, including the one that I just mentioned, were not respected. And this is the argument that the politicians from Republika Srpska raised. Also, I'm not sure if any major oppositional party in Republika Srpska manages to come to power, if this would also mean a big shift in their attitude towards, or the RS attitude towards Sarajevo and the whole state as such. I think there are, of course, genuine forces or the groups or organizations, individuals in Republika Srpska that are much more in favor of a functional state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. They're much more in favor of reforms, but in my opinion, they are still kind of marginalized, and they are not in this political Serbian mainstream in Republika Srpska. So this is one thing. Another, and so for I think that what is in Russia's interest today, absolutely agree, this is the Bosnia as the dysfunctional state that is facing a sort of institutional deadlock, that there's like the development drift, so the country does not make any economic progress. But this is exactly the reason why I would support this idea I mentioned about the single market partnership, that we should focus on economics, which is feasible, I believe, in this moment. That this would kind of move on the whole country, maybe create but this is like rather my sociological opinion, would create a new economic elites that would challenge the existing political elites, right? So just so sorry, thanks.
No, definitely. Thank you for just your addition. And well, I would say that we are reaching our time limit, but maybe we'll have, I will just pick another question or from the chat box for the Q&A box, because we received many excellent questions. So thank you for our really nice audience. I see that the last question is about Montenegro. I don't know if you would like to comment on that, but it would be an outlook, since you've mentioned that now Montenegro is between governments, and we barely talk about it, that an outlook in the region, that the question says that what can we expect from the new Montenegrin government in regards of Russia? I'm not sure if you would like to comment on that, but maybe just we haven't mentioned yet any other countries besides Bosnia and Serbia. Feel free to comment or just not. That's totally okay. Or Luka?
Okay, sure, I can maybe jump in just for a second. I mean, let us see still how the new Montenegrin government will look like. At this moment, this minority government supported by the DPS seem somewhat closer to what we've seen prior to the changes after the last elections in that sense. And I think, let's say the post pro-Serbian and pro-Russian actors in the Montenegrin politics are being excluded from this government at this moment. I mean, for now, I think this will definitely diminish the influence Russia has in Montenegro, which was probably not even that strong anymore since Montenegro joined NATO. But via the the Belgrade connection, it was still present. I think at the moment this will probably diminish it, but I'm not sure if in the long run we have to see how successful this government will be, and if the Democratic Front, which is this kind of pro-Serbian / pro-Russian part of the Montenegrin political landscape, if they will actually grow stronger. If the government, let's say, if the government fails, maybe they will grow even stronger, and this will maybe once again change this kind of a dynamic in the Montenegrin politics. I think for the foreseeable future, Russian influence in Montenegro will not be that strong, but I'm not sure how stable this government will be and how long it will last. We don't know, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years, we don't have a clue. So it's still very unpredictable, but I would say at the moment, the Russian influence in Montenegro is definitely limited.
Thank you for this brief answer. And I think that if the others agree with me, we can just come to our conclusion, because we elaborated on many things. And with this little outlook at the end, I think we are done. So, and since, as I mentioned, we are really reaching our time limit, I would say thank you for this excellent discussion and for being with us today. I think, yes, it was an excellent discussion, and I was thank for the audience for joining us this morning. Once again, I would like to underline that this project, the Western Balkans Trajectories, was financed by the International Visegrad Fund. So, and I just linked the mentioned report to the chat box, and that will be also uploaded to our website and shared on our Facebook page. So you can just look it up. And but in the meantime, please follow us on our social media platform for further events. I would just also note that the recording of this discussion will be uploaded to our YouTube channel soon. So if you missed some parts of it, you can just look it up. So once again, thank you for all of you, for the attendees and for the panelists for this excellent discussion, and have a nice day. So goodbye to everyone.